Hey guys, you're watching Maritime Punk, and this week I'm chatting with my bud Eddie Knowlton, better known as Fast Eddie. Now, you've been involved in the music scene for a long time, between your solo stuff and your Depth Cemetery, to name a few. What can you tell me about your early days? What kind of drew you to punk rock?
So my story kind of starts out in a little town called Kitchener-Waterloo. That's where I kind of spent my formative years. Spent a lot of time on the 519 punk forums. Growing up as a teenager, just watching all the local bands around my area, like Handheld and the Dirty Socks, some other influence. There's the Guelph scene was really close to us, so like we would go to the Trashateria pretty often, see a lot of really great, amazing touring bands like Fat Bands and Epitaph bands that would come through.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was really lucky, even though I wasn't in like the major city of Toronto, my music scene that I grew up in was really, really excellent. So
Yeah.
lots of jump off points for me there.
Yeah, and you're really fortunate to live in that area because Toronto is the hotspot of Canada for getting all those big bands and big names coming through. What are some of the most memorable shows that you've attended as a fan there?
So like growing up, like going to the Trafficeria, seeing bands like Rufio, and that's the first place I saw the Full Blast, which is they're from Burlington, but they, if you know fast punk and fast punk music of like that
Oh
kind of
yeah,
era, you would
I
know
know
them for
them.
sure, right? Like
I had the CD.
definitely for sure, big influence for me, and growing up, and all the band members that I've come across, like that, they've always been a really big influence. So I have to mention them. Then also seeing bands like No Use for a Name come through, Belvedere. There's just lots of really good like 90s 2000s type of bands that would roll through Toronto and then come hit a B market like Guelph or Kitchener, and it was really nice to see that stuff.
There's been some bands that okay, they were okay on CD, but then you see them live and it opens up this new corridor of appreciation for them. Were there some bands that maybe you've seen and you kind of maybe models the way you perform or do things, or maybe just that you were kind of in awe of just seeing a band live and realizing that they can kind of put it into this whole different level of entertaining?
Yeah, so like I was saying a little earlier, like growing up in KW, Handheld. So they're kind of back at it right now on Thousand Island Records with us. Growing up and just watching them, and they're not that much older than me, but I always thought that they were that much older than me for just how professional that they always were at every show. Like
Mm.
just blistering speeds of punk rock, but like always super tight, always super really nice, kind guys. Like I really, really owe a lot of like how I hold myself up in the scene from those guys and watching them. And what I mean, again, they were a local band, but then they'd go and play the Trashteria with Belvedere and Noise for a Name,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they just they became the band for all the bands around to want to play with. So
Mhm.
like they're heavily influenced on me for sure. And then just bands like there's a band called The Decay from Guelph who were not quite like fast punk, but just like what basically a lot of people would call kind of like ogrecore or like fast punk. Like they for me were the start of that kind of stuff, and they really opened my eyes to like hearing different types of punk rock, and and knowing it all encompasses together, right? Like hearing
Yeah,
like gruff punk rock and poppy pop punk. Like we can all play together and have a good time. Like that's
yeah.
that's what I remember.
Yeah. And as a songwriter, what's your songwriting process? Is it something you sit down specifically to do, or do you wait for that inspiration to hit you and then you kind of just run with it?
I mean, it's a little bit of column A, column B. Like sometimes I'll just have like some thoughts going on in my head, and like maybe some words or some phrases keep popping through, and I'll find a melody, and I'll just kind of start working with that. Other times, like just recently, I was like, you know what? I don't have enough songs in the key of C for Fast Eddie. So what can I do to make myself a song in that and make it different than what I already have or what I've already heard? And so sometimes it's a little bit of the inspiration within, and then a little bit of inspiration like out there, and seeing like what other people have done. Trying to take influence from some of that stuff.
Yeah. And speaking of inspiration, you do have some new material that's going to be fresh off the press by the time this is released. Can you tell me a bit about your latest endeavors?
Yeah, so me and my very good friend Scott Murray, we've done a couple tours together now. One of them was to go out east, and so the first one we did was just around Ontario. We called it the Blood, Sweat, and Beards tour. We're both bearded dudes, so kind of played into it. And
Awesome.
and if you know anything about DIY booking right now, it is you got to put your blood and sweat into that stuff if you want to
Hmm.
make it work. So it was a little bit grinding, but it made it work out, and it was such a good time that we decided to do it again. Headed out east, and during that time, we were playing together a lot, and getting closer. And he was learning some of my songs just offhand, and I was learning some of his songs, and I had the idea like, well, if we're doing this already, why don't we actually record each other's songs and then put out a little split? So that's what's going to be coming out in April. It's going to be the Blood, Sweat, and Beard split. I cover two Scott Murray songs. He
Yeah.
covers two of my songs, and they couldn't be any more different than the original versions, and
Hmm.
which I think is like the perfect thing you want for a split like this. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy. I'm really excited for everybody to hear them. I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be really cool.
I feel like more bands should do this because the Frank Turner No Effects, I was not sure how that was gonna go, and then when I listened to it, I was like, wow, like these different stylings of the songs and renditions were crazy good on both sides.
No, absolutely right, and it, harkens back to kind of those BYO splits with like
Hmm.
Rancid and
Yeah.
No Effects, and there's a few other ones, a band you can't mention anymore, but and then up in Canada we had the Monine and Alexa on Fire switcheroo
Yeah.
split,
I
and
remember
like
that.
when I first heard that, like I thought that was some of the coolest stuff I've ever heard because I
Hmm.
knew all those songs separately, and then to hear them that different way, but with those bands' whole sonics
Yeah.
infused into them. So cool, super cool.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the recent Circle Jerks and the Descendants one that just came out too.
Totally right. It's like it's a new idea that's kind of
Yeah.
coming back, so I feel like I've kind of jumped right on at the right time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, how about that Cemetary?
Yeah.
What do you have going on with that these days?
So Dead Cemetery is just currently finishing up our full length album. If anybody's familiar with us, we had an original EP that we put out back 2001, something like that. It's been a couple of years. That was originally just mostly recorded by our main man, Davey Knight. And then, he eventually recruited what is the current band right now, myself, Bill Morton, and Nick McDougall. And so we've been playing these older songs for a while, and we've kind of revamped them, how we play them, and we figured that we'd like to re-record them to the style and way that we're doing them now. And
Yeah,
so give everybody a new perspective on some of what we've been doing if you haven't heard us before.
yeah. So, what are some memories you have of the East Coast from times you've been here? Some memories of shows and just hanging out in the Maritimes.
So the very first time I went out there on tour was with a band called Life Like Rockets, and we were on tour with Time Brings Change and the Playdates, who were out from Halifax, I believe. And so that was a lot of fun. That was the first time I ever did something like that. I was in my early 20s. Just kind of jumped on this tour because one band dropped off, and we were like, let's do it. It was a lot of fun. I remember there was a last show was in Minto, New Brunswick, and it got pretty wild.
Yeah,
Some good times, some not so good times, but overall, a really, really fun trip. Definitely remember that. And pretty much ever since that time, I've always wanted to get back out there. It's always just been a driving force. I know so many of my fellow Ontario pals and friends, whether that be in bands or solo, they like to go out there and I always have a really good time. So I thought I'd try it myself, and it was something else, that's for
yeah,
sure. I really, really had some amazing times, and we had some pretty interesting lows if you want to get into some of those.
yeah.
But
Let's hear it.
yeah, overall, so yeah, basically, Dead Cemetery. We were able to tour around in this 2001 Ford Windstar for a little while, and we put a trailer hitch on it, and we went all around Ontario and Quebec a few times, and then I took that thing out east with me and Scott. And
Mhm.
so we were about 5 days in. We made our way from Ottawa out to Halifax, basically at this point in time. So we're leaving Halifax, ready to get to the next show, and all of a sudden, smoke starts billowing out of the front of the van. So we're like, oh, this is no good. So I pull over, and it turns out it's basically like a blown head gasket. And it is noon on a Friday of the last Friday of August. So nothing, nowhere's available for me to take it. Uh, Long story short, we basically had to rent a 20-foot U-Haul to get all of us and our stuff back to Ontario. But on that trek home, we were able to stop in and do our last date in Moncton, actually. So that was
Oh
the
wow.
final date of our tour. Yeah, yeah. So we made it to Moncton, played Pascal's house party. It was a lot of fun. It was like it was something that we really needed. It was a bit of a trying couple days, and to like be able to play a show after all that stuff
Yeah.
and not just go right home, like it really solidified kind of us being, on the road. It wasn't just, a fun little trip. It was like, no, we're gonna make this last show happen because that's what we set out here to do.
Yeah.
So it was again some highs to highs and some lows to lows, but I do it all over again. It was great.
Love it. That's an awesome story. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll see you back in the East Coast soon, and hopefully things will go a little smoother for you. But you'll always have the memories of those rough times. You can kind of go back and laugh at them now. I'm sure they weren't too funny in the moment, but it makes for a good story.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah. It's a what's a tour story without a van
exactly,
dying, right? It's gotta
exactly.
happen.
Yeah, for sure. So that was Fast Eddie. Thanks so much for chatting, and we'll catch up with you again sometime. So best of luck, and looking forward to the new material.
Cheers, man. Thanks so much for having me. See you soon.
See ya.